Welcome everybody, thank you for joining us. I'm Laura Jones, and in this session we're speaking with Jenny Maier. Jenny was an established environmental lawyer before ditching the desk job for a life in the outdoors, building communities around the common passion of running and fitness. She's an experienced running coach, certified personal trainer, yoga instructor, endurance athlete and gear junkie. Jenny lives in Berkeley, California with her husband, elite ultrarunner Christopher DeNucci. Jenny, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
So perhaps we could start by you telling us a little bit about your running background and how you transitioned to coaching and yoga from a career as an attorney. Big change.
Yeah, that happened maybe like 2013 I was an attorney for about 6 years prior to that. But running, I mean, I have this like long relationship with running, as we all do, but I ran track in high school. I had a really bad injury and actually just didn't run for about 10 years. And it wasn't until my late 20s that I started to get back into running and started to run ultras. But in terms of how I got out of my career and kind of got into this career path, I was never really that enamored with an idea of like sitting at a desk and working inside all day. And I loved my job and I loved the work I did and I loved the people who I worked with, but the lifestyle, the day-to-day just wasn't for me. And I remember I was working down in Redwood City one summer, and I looked outside. It was a miserable day, and we had this one tiny little window. And I looked outside, and I saw a guy riding his bike on the bike path at like 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And I remember being like, I want to be that person who can go on a bike ride at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And that was kind of like what spurred it, in that I wanted a more flexible work schedule, and I kind of wanted to be with more like-minded people. I quit without knowing what I was going to do next. I had a friend who had just opened up a running shop in Mill Valley, and randomly, it was like 2 weeks, I thought I was going to be unemployed for like a while, and like 2 weeks after that, I got a phone call from Brett Rivers up at San Francisco Running Company, and asked if I wanted to come work there. And that's kind of what led me to the more of like being integrated into the running community. I was a personal trainer actually prior to that, so I did have some background in that, but really like what tied me back to the community, which is like what I love about the sport, was working at SFRC for 3 years and then starting coaching shortly after that.
Oh, amazing. And now you're able to integrate the thing that you love to do is your job, which is lovely. So can you tell us a little bit about your general coaching philosophy and more specifically about coaching ultra runners?
Yeah, so my general coaching philosophy is definitely one of like, I don't do just plans and give them out to people. It's definitely one-on-one custom coaching. It's very high touch. And I believe that for a lot of people, like that's what's going to work. So for me, it's all about learning the person as a person first, and as an athlete, and the data and whatever their goals are kind of second, but really like, who are they? Why haven't they found success in other ways, or with other people or with other plans? And kind of really trying to tailor a plan that would maximize their chances of success in adhering and succeeding in a plan. Because I seriously think that you could be the best coach in the world, and you could like make the best plan in the world, and it's not worth anything if the athlete doesn't have time to do it, or it's not motivating them in the right way. So for me, it's really about building a relationship in which I can really learn about that person and what is going to work best for them, and then create a plan that essentially works around their life. So I would never expect an athlete to like miss their kid's soccer game, or like not go skiing for a bachelor party or whatever it is. Like if they want to have a life outside of running, I think that that's a really healthy thing. So that's definitely like, I think the foundation of that. And obviously with my background as a personal trainer and yoga instructor, I think out of the box a lot. So a lot of athletes come to me after being injured or plateauing under traditional plans, because I tend to integrate cross training a little bit more and have a little bit more of a a focus on trying something new and being able to like take that risk with them, to find a plan that they might not be able to find otherwise.
Oh, that's brilliant. And are there any other coaches that you admire or that have inspired you, that you sort of align with in your coaching?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many great coaches out there in the community. I think that it's great that everybody has a variety of approaches, because I think that just like a plan isn't one size fits all, I think a coaching relationship isn't one size fits all. And I think that having choices is a really great thing. And I encourage people when they hire me to talk and explore other options, because I really want it to be a good match. In terms of other people who I think, I mean, as a good segue for pushing the envelope and thinking outside the box, I mean, Jason Koop comes to mind. He's an amazing coach. And from Jason Koop from CTS. And I think that he's had results in doing a plan for athletes that I think has taken criticism at times from more traditional coaches. And I think that there's a time and place for what he does with his athletes. And I really applaud his ability to rely on science and data to drive like his belief in what he does for his athletes. Because I think as a coach, you really have to like trust what you're doing and have the confidence to move forward. And then just on a business level and personal level, I really admire Ian Sharman, because he just has such an amazing approach to his business, and he's so professional and organized, and his athletes, they get that high touch with him. And I don't know how he does it. They get that high touch with him while he having a whole bunch more athletes than you would think is possible in order to do that. And he just does such a great job and is such a solid runner. And he's one of those, I think, exceptions where I could say he's like an amazing runner and an amazing coach, and he's equal in both. So
yeah,
and I really do think any I think coach that integrates and knows the importance of like strength training and the importance of resilience as opposed to just miles. I think like there's a few local coaches, Angela Thierry comes to mind, who really like have a focus on that as well. I think probably align best with what I do.
Yeah, amazing. And obviously every client is unique, but are there any sort of key principles that you give to pretty much every client, regardless of their experience and level? What are your kind of staples that you like?
I mean, for me, I think that the one common denominator, no matter which you're dealing with, either an experienced athlete or a newbie or someone that has all the time in the world and a flexible schedule, or someone that is super busy and travels a lot for work, is like, you obviously wanted to hire a coach or wanted to go into ultra running for a reason. So, I mean, my advice to them is to always know what that reason was. Because like things are going to get hard. And when they get hard, you have to remind yourself that like you did this to yourself, that like you signed up for this and that you wanted at some point to do this. And to just always remind yourself of like what that was that drove you to like do this really tough thing. And just come back to that time and time again. And when your answer starts to be like, I don't know, or I don't know anymore, then like maybe that's a time that you step back and you reevaluate like what you want to do. Because I think that without that, this training process becomes really just not fun.
Yeah, I think that's a really good advice for when you're actually doing a race as well, isn't it? Remember that you chose to do this. Yes, it's hurting now, but
I remind myself a lot when I'm running races that like nobody made me do it. There was like, I wanted to do it. I wanted to be out here, and like whether or not I regret that decision or not at that point, you always have to come back to it and say like, at some point I knew I could do this. I had faith in myself that I could do this. And at some point you have to come back to it and say like, like time to just be tough, but it definitely, I think races are hard, especially like long ones, but I think the training process is so much harder. Like it's hard to stick with. And I think that people come to coaches for different reasons. Obviously like accountability, a plan, maybe some assurance or cheerleading, friend to lean on advice. But I think in the end, like, it begins and ends with you. You know, I tell every person that when you hire a coach, you're not buying a PR, and you're not buying anyone to do the work for you. Like, you're going to have to put in the work. And I think that that's an important thing to always keep in mind, that like, it's hard whether you have a coach, it's hard whether you don't have a coach, it's hard whether you're fast, it's hard whether you're slow. It's just, you're always going to have those moments. So I think having a real answer within you that like brings you back to why you like fell in love with the sport, or why you wanted to do this event, I think is always a great way to like bring it full circle and like reset.
Yeah. Yeah. And did it surprise you when you first started coaching how much, you know, you often become sort of a bit of a semi-counselor for people, don't you?
I say that a lot. I mean, I'm a yoga instructor as well, and you'd be amazed how many different people come to yoga classes for different reasons. And you end up, I feel like, being a little bit of like especially this time of year when it's like the New Year's holidays, like people come in, they're stressed. But coaching's the same way. It's like a lot of times you're dealing with people's personalities, you know, and I choose very hard to also select the people who come to me in terms of what I think would be a good working relationship, like personalities and people who I feel like we would mesh well. I think that it is hard. People have stuff going on in their lives. And a lot of times, you know, as much as I really, really try my hardest to like, I'm not ever going to give people false affirmations, like of positive things when it's not looking good. I'm always going to be realistic. I blame it on the fact that I'm like from New Jersey and I'm pretty straightforward, but I think that it's also important though to like be there for somebody and to like know that you're in this with them in some capacity, even if like you're not out on the long run like with them, that you're thinking about them and that you're rooting them on. And like it's important for them to know that like they have an advocate like in you, whether they succeed or whether they fail.
Yeah, definitely. And you mentioned being a yoga instructor there, and obviously yoga is something that you incorporate into your coaching. So can, you know, for anyone who doesn't know, can you tell us a little bit about, you know, what yoga is and what the principles are?
Sure. So yes, I teach yoga. I actually did that secondarily to personal training and run coaching. I actually did it because I was getting so many requests from clients about working mobility and yoga into their training, and I didn't know anything about it. So I went out and got my 200 hour, then I got my 500 hour, and then I got my 1,000 hour, and now I teach also. But yoga, I mean, is basically, the word is yoke. It brings in together the union of mind and body, and it's just functional. Like for me, when I teach yoga to runners, it's not anybody who comes to my classes here in the Bay or was in Colorado when I taught last summer will tell you it's nothing like you would get in a regular yoga class. I mean, I don't think I've ever done like a Warrior 2 in like a yoga for runners class. And not that it's not a good posture, it's just there's better postures that teach that body movement of external rotation of the front leg, of axial extension than Warrior 2. So yoga and what I do as yoga for runners, I think are kind of different. And I do teach both, but yoga for runners, I consider it, if you've ever like gone to PT, like physical therapy, I do more stuff that I think is closer to that realm, even though I'm not a physical therapist and I'm not trained as a medical professional. I think I do more functional movement than typical, like, you know, tree pose or something. And you work primarily on flexibility and strength component, as well as mobility, just to help balance out the body. So for me, I think that yoga has a lot of benefits. Breath work, proprioception, balance, control, patience. And I think you can work all those principles in while physically doing something that I think is a little more an efficient use of your time than maybe going to a traditional vinyasa class, which I coach lots of athletes that are like, I love yoga as yoga. So they go to yoga, and that's great. And I think that's important too.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a little bit of both. And I borrow some stuff that I learned in personal training. I borrow some stuff, you know, that I learned from, you know, when I worked in the ski industry and foot biomechanics. I borrow some things from yoga, and you kind of marry them all together. So it's easy enough to say yoga for runners, but I think the word yoga scares people away, and it's really like not like intense yoga. It's more like just learning how to control and move your body in an efficient way for like what you're doing like outside of the studio.
Yeah, because I think, like you said, the word yoga sometimes, particularly some men, are a bit like, whoa, you know, I've seen all this weird talk that goes on in these yoga classes.
Yeah, or like I just did an article last year for Ultrarunning magazine, and it dives a lot into that. Like, people are intimidated because they aren't flexible, or they're intimidated because they've never stepped foot in a yoga room. And my yoga for athletes workshops and classes are the least intimidating setting ever. We do probably the first half of the class, if not more, on our backs, like laying on the ground. It's very close to the ground. It's very trying to unravel the layers of demand and not add on anything that's unnecessary, because we do a lot out there. And both when it comes to the strength component and the flexibility component, really doing it with an eye towards like what you functionally need as an athlete, as opposed to just like what's going to look good on an Instagram post.
Yeah. And you mentioned some of the things that, you know, it's beneficial for, you know, balance, and I heard you say patience, which I can understand for ultramarathon runners, that might be really useful. Is there anything else in particular that you think makes yoga really useful for ultramarathon runners?
Yeah, so I mean, just so many ways you can use it. I think that we typically think of yoga as something that would make us more flexible, and something that we would do as like a recovery, you know, like a recovery activity. And while I think that it has benefit in those areas, I think that you can also use it in terms of like light muscle activation before you go out for a run as a warm-up. You can definitely use it for strength. Yoga uses slower movements that are like more closer to the like bone muscle stabilization movements. So I feel like you could really gain some really deep stability in those joints, really enhancing resilience. Breath work, I mean, to breathe generally is hard for people, I think. Just to sit, close your eyes, and breathe for like 3 minutes. But what yoga does too is encourage you to breathe while you're doing something difficult, right? So if you're in a stretch and you're breathing, your body has physical demands on it, and you are using your breath to get through that, which is very similar to what we do out there running. So it really trains not only your lungs and your body to work all together, but it trains your intercostal muscles. It trains the type of stuff that is under demand out there that we don't have a chance to train unless you're running every single day for a really long time. So definitely balance. And I think for runners especially, like the value of being able to not do something super like high intense, there's benefit to that, right? It's the downregulation of the nervous system. We don't get a chance to unplug and to tune it out and to slow down. We always want to be moving or thinking we have to like be working really hard. And I think that it has benefits to the nervous system to sort of take everything down a notch and to slow down. Restorative yoga is I think one of the best things that for like someone who's completely new, like where to start. It's easy, it's accessible, and it feels great when you're done. It's like you've gotten a whole night's sleep and you're just in a 1-hour yoga class.
Yeah, and what are your thoughts? I know a lot of people think of, you mentioned before, a lot of people might get put off because they think they're not going to be flexible enough. What are your thoughts on the value of it from a strength point of view?
I think anybody, even if you came to one of my regular public classes, so a class that I teach not to just to runners, but to anybody, you'll see that like 80% of my class is focused on strength-based approach as opposed to a flexibility-based approach. I only believe in flexibility as an important component when it is flexibility driven by strength. So your level of hip extension is not how soft your front of the hip flexor, your labrum can move, but how strong is your hamstring and your glute in that hip extension movement. I think that there's always a flip side to the coin. You know, one thing's stretching, the other side's working. So instead of just focusing on stretching the one side, focus on strengthening the other side, and you'll allow for that good range of motion I also feel like for flexibility, runners just don't need as much as they think they do. The natural range of motion or acceptable range of motion is like, you know, external rotations like 40 to 60%, straight leg extensions like 40 to 60 degrees, and 90 degrees for straight leg kind of hip flexion. Most of us can do that without going to a yoga class. So you don't need to be able to put your head, you know, knee behind your head in order to have a healthy body. As a matter of fact, I'm very hypermobile, and a lot of the people like me who have natural flexibility actually find it very hard to stay injury free. It's actually the more flexible people that get injured more, in my opinion. But in terms of the strength component, I think that there's just so much you can do, especially with the hip joint, especially with stabilizing the hip joint, that you can do in the yoga room. I mean, single leg balance is one of the single most important things, I think, for runners to work on. Running's a single leg sport. You're on one leg, just alternating 100% of the time. So really focusing on that deep stabilization of the hip joint, I think is an important component, and something that is like really nuanced, but very easy to focus on in the yoga room.
Yeah. And so anyone who's watching who, you know, perhaps has never ever done any yoga before, but is, you know, is interested in perhaps integrating a little bit into their training, what would be a good place? Where would be a good place for them to start?
So, like I mentioned before, I think restorative yoga is the most approachable because you're completely supported. It's basically you're in very mild postures, always usually on the ground, and it has a lot of benefits. But if you're thinking about going into, if you don't live near me or am able to access a yoga for athletes specific curriculum, then I think going into a yoga class or going into an online course for yoga would be similar to what you would do for like anything else that you are new to and are integrating in, right? You would go into it with some caution, with understanding that this is something that's your body hasn't done before. Go into it with an open mind, okay? Because you're probably not going to be very good or be able to follow every single thing, and to just you know, keep an open mind to the fact that like this is new, and that, you know, it's going to feel, there's going to be an adjustment period, and definitely go into it with an eye towards like, why am I doing this? Like, am I doing this because I really love yoga and I want to like learn how to do handstand, or am I doing this because I need it to complement my running? And if you're doing it to complement your running, then you really, really, especially if you're in a public vinyasa class, like check your ego at the door, because you don't maybe need to modify everything, but if you're doing it for that purpose, you really have to check your ego at the door, and you have to be able to not do certain things that are not good always for a runner's body, like overstretching the posterior chain, and, you know, too much of one thing or the other thing. I think, you know, and I could go on forever, but there's lots of things that we do in traditional vinyasa that are great for the body, but they're not always useful for a runner's body, and sometimes they have a higher risk of injury. So I think that always keeping in mind, like, do I need to be doing this, or can I, when the instructor says if you need to modify, come down to the knees, like even if I can do it standing, should I come down to the knee? And for most beginner yogis who are runners doing it for a purpose of enhancing their run training, come down to the knee.
Yeah. Okay. And now you mentioned it earlier on that, you know, with the background as a PT and things like that, you understand the value of incorporating cross training within a training plan. What sort of cross training would you use with an ultra runner? Would you recommend?
So I'll just like clarify. So PT as in personal trainer,
yeah,
and personal trainer, not a physical therapist. Okay.
Yeah, sorry.
Just wanted to make sure. All right.
Yeah.
So, because I have friends in physical therapy school and friends who are physical therapists, and they studied a lot longer than I on some of this stuff. So I want to give them the credit when credit's due, of course. cross training, I think like it's important to step back and actually talk about like what are we talking about when it comes to cross training, because I think that it fits into categories. And one of my pet peeves is when you have a coach that gives you a plan and on the one day it just says cross training and there's no suggestion on like what that means. Like, is it supposed to be an easy day? Is it supposed to be a hard day? Is it supposed to be a cardio driven day or a strength driven day? So I think you can use cross training in a number of different ways. And you should use them, I think, in multiple different ways. I think there's some coaches that just don't see that much value to cross training because it's more about the law of specificity. You want to be a good runner, run more. But I think a lot of the athletes, especially that I work with, if they're like coming back from injury or are prone to injury or just looking to like run slightly less miles or integrate more things that they like to do, not running, into their training, I think that you could mix it in. Like, one of my big questions that I ask when I'm onboarding somebody is like, what kind of cross training do you do? And what like are your top 3 things that like you love doing? And sometimes they'll be like, I bike commute to work, or I love going to yoga, or I go to CrossFit every once in a while. And I really try my hardest to figure out like what they enjoy and what is useful and integrate that in. So you can use cross training as a performance thing. You could go to a spin class and it could be a really great cardio workout, or you could do a quick recovery on the bike and it's recovery. So I think it's like, it's such an important tool to be able to put in. And I think one of the biggest value that it has too is when a runner is feeling like something in their ankle doesn't feel quite right or something. I mean, you don't have to stop training just because you can't run or like run through something. So obviously I use cross training as a little bit of a substitute, but also as a real complement. You know, there's certain things that you can get in cross training that you just simply can't get running. And I think strength is the biggest thing for that. And almost every athlete I coach, regardless of where their foundation is, they're always going to have, when I start coaching them, some component of a strength block, a block where they create some good foundation that we can build on.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that you can use it in a variety of different ways. And I think there's like, I hate swimming. I can't swim. I have some athletes that love swimming. That's like that's their happy place. Either they come from a triathlon background and they really miss it or what. So yeah, and like on a harder day, I know how to create a workout in the pool. I'll give them a workout in the pool if they want to do it. If they can't make it to the track, you know, they want a recovery. Sure, go swim for half an hour, recovery, you know? So I think it's different. And that's why I just always coming back to how like custom coaching and just one-on-one things just works better for you, because if you look up a plan and it just says cross training and it doesn't tell you what to do, like you might end up adding in a workout that you didn't intend, or taking a day off that takes away from the momentum that you built.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Moving on to race day. Do you have any tips on crewing, on pacing, on race preparation, that sort of thing for both regular runners and elites? You know, what would be your top tips?
Yeah, so I've crewed like a number of times. I probably crewed and paced more times than I've probably raced. I don't know. And I'll add one more layer on that too, and that's volunteering. And I think that if you're thinking about going into ultras and you've never volunteered or crewed or paced, like start with volunteering, because you don't want to screw up anyone else's race, but definitely get in there, like see what it's like to be at mile 80. Because that might make a decision for you about whether you want to do that to yourself. I think for a lot of people, I always encourage my athletes, if they never run a 100-miler, to go volunteer overnight at a 100-miler and see what it's really like. Because I think we get this impression when we look at Instagram, or we follow stories that only follow the elites, and we see happy faces and breaking finish line tapes, and there's a lot of ugliness that happens or could happen out there too for a runner of any level. So I think that's important. But in terms of crewing and pacing, whether it's an elite or just a regular mid-pack or back-of-the-pack runner, I think like the number one thing that you have to keep in mind is the day does not belong to you, like whatsoever. It's your runner's day, and you are there for them for no other reason. You are not there to like spectate the race for someone else that you know is going to be through there. You're not there to like see Rob Krar come through. You know, you're not there, you know, you're there for a purpose. You're doing a job. So, you know, obviously you have to take care of yourself, and you want to hopefully you enjoy yourself as well. But like, you are at work. And so when I'm crewing, whether it's for Chris or someone else or pacing, like I'm at work. And my job is to solely support them in however they need. And every runner is different in terms of what they need. On a more practical level, be flexible, like, cause anything can happen, and just be on time. Just like be on time. Like, don't be late. Don't stress out your runner. Like, be on time. If they tell you to be somewhere at this time, be there early. Like, they ask you to be at a runner meeting, be there, be present. Like, I know as a runner, but also like as someone that has, like, when crew captaining for Chris at Western, like, I know I demand like a lot of our friends that offer, but I think it's the same thing. Chris and I, you know, we're very different people, but we've worked together for so many years that I think I know a lot about what he needs during races that he might not even know. And so I think I definitely feel like I could probably like crew him for Western, like with my eyes closed, but it's not that easy. And especially if you're crewing somebody that like you don't know that well, it's just a friend or maybe a stranger. Like, I think talking with them and really understanding like how they like to be supported is the most valuable thing. Cause some people like love tough love, and some people are like, no, like I want a hug. Like, you give me a hug. Like, I'm covered in poison oak. I don't care. Like, you're giving me a hug because I'm gonna break down and cry, and I need like someone to tell me it's going to be okay. And I think it's different, and it's about like really like being flexible, because what they think they need might not be what they actually need.
Yeah, that's really good advice. Okay, and do you have any advice for someone who is perhaps looking for an ultra running coach for the first time? What they should be looking for?
Yeah, so like I mentioned before, I think that like I will never say that I am the coach for everybody. I don't think that there's a coach out there that can coach every type of person and every type of distance and every personality. Just like any other relationship, I think, like, you need to be aware that there's going to be good matches, and there's going to be okay matches, and there's going to be bad matches. And so I think talk to as many people as possible about getting information about what's out there. There isn't really a resource, as you know, like why this is going on too, but there isn't really a resource to find anybody. You hear about word of mouth, you know. My first coach, who's amazing, by the way, was Chrissy Mel. And I literally just knew about her from basically being a badass out on the trails and like beating all the boys. And I wanted to do some pretty hard stuff back then, not anymore. And I needed some help to go that distance. So I think word of mouth is great, but also take it with a grain of salt, because like what works for Joe might not work for Mary. And I think that the more that you talk to the coach, you'll start to like, you're going to be talking to the coach a lot. So if you're like, can't stand the sound of their voice, like probably just should not end it, you know? I think it's about meshing with personality. It's also meshing about philosophy. It's also about like understanding like any red flags. Like someone says like, I don't incorporate cross training at all, or or I'm high mileage, or somebody that does big generalities, I think is like a big red flag for me, because I think a coach they work for you, so you should be adaptable. And the last thing is, I think that there's a lot of like noise that happens in like social media and happens. I mean, coaching, back when I there was no coaches. Nobody had coaches except for like elite runners. Like literally no one had coaches. And I felt almost weird when I hired a coach, because I was like, am I good enough for a coach? Do I like deserve a coach? And now I think it's become more commonplace. You know, a lot of people of all levels and abilities are searching for coaches. And I think that's great, because I think more people now are taking an investment on themselves. But there's a lot of noise in like social media and stuff about like people coaching. There's just like a lot of people out there. There's a lot of runners who have turned into coaches. And I think that a lot of them are really good. And like I know offhand like probably 15 people who I think are great runners and are also great coaches. But I think what's really important is like, not just because, I mean, I think I've won like one race ever, but just because you are not an elite runner does not mean you are not a great coach, and vice versa. You know, just because, you know, like are a great runner doesn't mean you're not a great coach. I think that I know there's plenty of both, but I think that just wanting to be coached by somebody because you're starstruck by them, or because they're winning a race, I think is like a big pitfall. I think you need to dive deeper into like how they're going to coach you, just because I think a lot of people who come from just a running background and they're just a runner, and then they're like, hey, I'll coach people. They coach by like a personal bias a little bit. Like, this is how I would train, so I'm going to train somebody. And unless you are that, you know, just like them, I think sometimes that doesn't work. Or like they don't know how to coach all levels. I've seen a lot of mid-pack people kind of get, you know, basically like, you know, run over by plans that are made for elite runners, and vice versa. So I think it's just, you know, I think it's just knowing that everyone's going to kind of teach and coach differently. And it's just about finding what works for you, regardless of like who that person is, whether they're a male or female or what. Like, you can have your wish list of like what you want. You know, maybe it's super fun to be coached by somebody that like you really admire, and that I think can and should play into it. You're probably paying them a premium too for being like a rock star. But I think too that there's value to people out there who know a lot about coaching and about the body, and can coach equally well. So I think it's about keeping an open mind. It's about talking to lots of different coaches and just finding one that really works for you, regardless of all that other stuff.
Yeah. And like you said, it's a bit like any other relationship. You've got to get the chemistry right, haven't you?
I mean, it really is a relationship. I mean, my athletes, a lot of them actually have become, I mean, I try not to blur professional and personal lines too much, but a lot of them become my friends. You know, and I take pride in that, because I think I really like got to a place where they fully trust me, like they would trust any other friend or any other relationship. Yeah. Communication is key. It's just like a relationship. I think communication is like one of the biggest problems in relationships generally. But then when you take an athlete and a coach, if communication's off, like the athlete might not be happy with what's going on, but if they don't communicate that to the coach isn't a mind reader. So like, I think communication is like paramount. So yeah, it's like any other relationship. And I think looking for a coach is just like looking for a relationship in a lot of ways. Yeah.
Okay, just before we move on to the closing questions, you're very much a gear junkie. Can you give us a quick rundown on your favorite running gear, your favorite ultra running gear?
Yeah, I mean, we're embarrassed, like Chris and I are embarrassed about how much space in our house is taken up by shoes and gear. We're both very much into all the things. And I don't just like to collect, I really like to learn about what's out there, the new stuff, you know. Working at San Francisco Running Company was amazing because you got to see and feel and touch and try basically everything that's out there. And I think for like 99% of things, whether you're talking about shoes or nutrition, it's really what works for the person. So what works for me, I like this shoe, probably not going to work for you. So that's hard. But shoes, go to a specialty running store. Just like, don't buy it online just because you hear somebody likes this shoe. Like, it's very personal. And I think shoes and nutrition are like two of the things that I think we tend to like take advice from other people and then like not realize that like we're all made differently and it's not going to work for you. But generally, I mean, I use Victory Sport Design bags for, I mean, they are a lifesaver for crewing. Like, keeps you organized. They're super durable. I mean, obviously I use them as drop bags too, but the bigger bags that I use for crewing for Chris, I mean, we go through them because we have so many from races that we've done. And I think that it's important to have a bag that can withstand like the elements and keep you organized. And so, and Victor's a friend of ours and he makes just amazing product based off of his experience as a runner and crew. I love gear from Rabbit. They're small. Well, actually, they're growing. They're not even that small anymore, but they're a woman-owned company, apparel company down in Santa Barbara, and they make gear for runners. And just there's so much stuff that used to be out there like 10 years ago that you're like, who wears this stuff? And I think now, like Rabbit, you know, there's other companies as well that I think make stuff that are really like developed by runners, and they're functional, and they really pay attention to the research and development of their stuff. Let me see. I have my little like thing. Oh, so this thing, like resistance band, it's like $2 on Amazon. It is like the best thing for runners to have on hand. Great strength tool. If you're traveling for work, it's super small. Put it in your carry-on, put it in your bag, and there's so much stuff you can do with it that you never have to stop like working, even if you're like on the go or traveling. And then, I mean, there's a lot of like other stuff that I feel like isn't gear, but it's stuff that I feel like is essential for runners. Like just having a good like chiropractor, massage therapist, or ART body worker, really like taking care of yourself, I think is important. Just really, I think just whatever like you need in your training is like the gear that you should have. So some people have all the things, right? They have the compression boots, they have the Theragun, they have all the things. And some people are like, no, I don't need any of that. And so I think gear can be different for everybody too. Oh, yeah. There is one thing though, a good headlamp. If you're an ultra runner, seriously, if you're going to make one investment other than shoes, like invest in a good headlamp. And I mean, I find some and then I use them for long races and I love them, but like you tweak it. You have to test it. Seriously, it's a lot of money, but invest in a good one. Especially if you are doing hundreds or anything overnight, it will save you so much aggravation and grief to just like throw some money at the problem, get a great headlamp or get one or two and have that. It's like something that I think we think of as an afterthought sometimes, and then we don't realize like those big bike light ones, they really do help. Like I think especially during hundreds, I think that's like the one thing that every time I don't have a good one, I'm kicking myself. So
yeah, I can imagine.
And I use a Petzl one, but I use Petzl, but there's lots of great ones as well.
Okay, great, thank you. Okay, as we look to sort of come to a close, I like these interesting questions at the end. What do you think are 3 characteristics which are useful to be successful in ultra running?
So I thought about this because you did warn me there was going to be this question. So I thought about this because it's hard to just pick 3, right? I think you have to really love the sport. I think you have to love some aspect of the sport, whether it's the community or whether it's the running itself or whether it's nature. I think you really have to find something that you can fall back on and really enjoy. Like aside from the results, you know, because you have to ask yourself, like if I fail in my goal, like what did I just do with 6 months of my life? So I think you have to like something regardless of where it ends up. You know, I like lovingly say the Steve Jobs quote of like, the journey is the reward. It's like you have to really love the process as much as you love the end result. The second one would be having faith in yourself, because you got to believe in yourself at some point. You got to have confidence, and you have to know that like it's a hard thing, but you can do it. And the third one is like some variation of rolling with the punches, like being adaptable, because there's going to be so much stuff that's going to go wrong in your training, and maybe even, hopefully not, but maybe even in your race. You know, like I've been in races before where there's been course sabotage, you know, they've moved flags, or I get lost, or the one thing that I know I can eat at mile 70 all of a sudden doesn't work. And I think like you have to just be able to be adaptable, stay calm in the circumstances, and really like be smart in terms of how you adapt to these obstacles that happen in training and in racing. So for sure, I think that the most successful ultra runners are ones that can just not get too fixated when something goes wrong. Like they don't let it bring them down to the point of like no return. They can bounce back from things really easily. And I think all the other stuff physically, like that's just your training, that just falls into place. But I think definitely all of those things are to me are a mental component, which I think speaks worlds to like how important the mental component is to training and racing and ultras.
Yeah. Yeah. And on the back of that, if there's anyone who's watching who is just thinking about perhaps entering their first ultra, what would be a piece of advice that you would give them?
For sure that it's a time commitment. It's a time, money, and energy commitment. I mean, as much as coaches like me and other people, we work around your life and with your schedule, like there's no doubt about it. It's basically like a part-time job most of the time. And so just know that it's going to be that thing that is going to be your thing, you know, for a while. I enjoyed a lot of other hobbies before I became a runner. And not that I don't enjoy those things anymore, but I just don't do them anymore. I used to sit down on Sundays. This was my time. It's a Sunday today. And I used to watch football, like from morning till end. I had the NFL ticket, huge. I ran 3 fantasy football leagues. I haven't watched a lick of football seriously in like years. Just Sundays are now for working out, for running, and for training. So just know that like it's going to change a little bit, but hopefully it's stuff that you like and enjoy, and you don't miss that stuff because you really love what you're doing and your goals. So like ultra running is different, I think, than, I don't want to even say ultra running, because marathons, I mean, there's a huge time commitment too, but I think training for anything is way different than just being a runner. Just going out and running versus training. I think it's a huge like mental energy component. You're always like trying to think about what I'm going to do today. You know, everything kind of starts revolving around it. And I think like the biggest piece of advice I can give is to be prepared for that, but also to know when you need to reclaim your life a little bit, to like also know that you can let that get like out of control. And I've seen that happen where it's like, you know, I can't eat brunch with you because I'm only eating that, you know, it's, I think that for most runners, you can still, I think, come back to some semblance of a normal life. I think either during recovery or during your training, but I think it's also up to you because you can get very into it too. So it's, you know, to each their own, but I think having, you know, I mean, my tagline for my company is building balanced runners. I'm all about finding balance. So find the balance between training really hard, but still not like losing all the stuff that you love and that, you know, don't like not see your friends and family. I mean,
yeah.
You know, so I think that's the advice I would give, is that it can start taking its life of its own, but I think it's up to you too, to like find that balance that really works for you in terms of training.
Yeah, definitely. That's good advice. And my next question was going to be, what about if any of our audience who are established ultra runners and they're keen to take their running to the next level? I mean, a lot of what you just said will apply to them as well, I guess. But is there anything in particular that you would say to anyone who's sort of, really keen to push forward?
Yeah, I'm like, elite runners are runners too. No, but it is true. A lot of it, and you know what, even though I do coach my more like elite or front of the pack athletes in terms of a similar philosophy as I train my mid pack and back of the pack, I don't treat them totally separate. There obviously are some differences. And I think that one of the biggest pitfalls that I've seen is lack of focus. So like if you're really good, if you're just naturally talented as a runner or having a lot of success, I think it's like really easy. You are going to get emails from race directors that are going to say, come and run this race and come and run this race and do this event. And you're going to get pulled in a lot of directions. And so I think when you're starting to get, I guess seasoned is a little different, but for that front of the pack kind of person who's kind of finding some success and they're looking to take it to the next level, I think finding focus, finding what kind of runner you actually want to be, and going in that direction, and always keeping an eye towards a long-term goal, playing the long game. If your ultimate goal is to, like run an FKT on some really mountainous, thing, then like maybe all your invitations to run a lot of like runnable stuff, like, I mean, maybe you should just be training with an eye towards that goal as opposed to just doing whatever's put in front of you. And I think that it's really easy to get distracted by the loud, fun things that are going on around you, but you're the same. We all have the same 24 hours in a day, and we all have the same 7 days in a week. So like, you're not going to have time and energy to do everything under the sun. And I think it like, I'm the same, that can apply to really everybody too, but like, I'm the same way. I'm like, I want to do this and I want to do this and I want to do this and I want to go here. And you don't have time or money or energy to do all of that. And so I think focusing, especially for people who are more elite, runners, I think having that focus will really yield the most success. So yeah. I think for seasoned athletes, it's very similar. It's like, you've done a lot of stuff. Like, what do you like out of that stuff? I love social media for a lot of things. And one is obviously just keeping up with what everyone's doing in the running world. Chris and I are friends with Ian Sharman, obviously, and he just did a post recently about comrades, and I don't know if he's doing it. I haven't talked to him, but we'll see him in a couple weeks. But I don't know whether he's doing it or not, but like, he wrote something about like races that really make you smile or really make you like, you look back on them and you really like love those races. Like for someone that's been running for many years and has accomplished so much, like maybe taking a step back and being like, what out of all that stuff felt like, brought me the most joy, and return to those things and focus your goals on more about like, if I only have 5 more races to run, just hypothetically, like what would I pick and what would be left on that list? And I think that's a really easy way to come back to it, is stuff that really like you look back on really fondly.
Yeah, that's really good advice. I really like that advice. I think that just about brings us to the end of the session. It was really interesting. Thank you so much for joining us, Jenny. Really appreciate that.
Yeah, you're welcome.
And everybody, go and check out. What we'll do is we'll put the links so you can follow Jenny on social media and read a little bit more about her. Thank you everybody for watching, and thank you again, Jenny.